Hey guys, welcome back to Declassified. Today's topic is very close to my heart. I'm going to be diving into our own trying to conceive journey, and it's become very highly requested by so many of you. You guys have reached out to me in my stories on Instagram. You've shared your own infertility stories and your struggles with trying to conceive. Some very encouraging and some also very heartbreaking. And I just think it's an important conversation that needs to be had. So we're going to push this episode up in my schedule for this podcast because it seems time sensitive. I mean, we are in our own IVF cycle, and as this episode drops, we will be in our egg retrieval surgery. It's coming up this Wednesday. So as of right now, I am on day 7 of stimulation medication, and it's just all very exciting and overwhelming and beautiful and scary at the same time. But I think it's an important conversation to talk about because this is becoming so common. Infertility is steadily increasing. 1 in 8 couples will have trouble getting pregnant naturally, which is really scary because that's a lot of people. So today we're going to dive into our own trying to conceive journey that we're still in. Like I said, we're not all the way through it. We have just started our IVF cycle. And even though we're not pregnant yet, I'm really excited to do this episode and to document where we've been thus far in this journey, not only to help you guys and to help educate, but I also think it'll be fun for us to look back on one day. And who knows, maybe our future child will look back on this episode and get to watch how hard we fought for their existence. And that's just kind of a crazy thought in and of itself because we have still so many hurdles to jump through. But once everything is said and done and we are blessed with a child, Lord willing, I do plan on doing another episode surrounding our complete IVF journey because I just know I'm going to learn so much in this process, and I already know I'm going to change and grow a lot. And I'm not going to lie, it does feel scary welcoming everyone into our journey. But again, I say this all the time. If sharing helps just one person, if my story helps just one person, then it's worth it to me. But I also want to say that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just a woman who's been through a lot and has experienced a lot in this process. I mean, in high school, like they teach us how to not get pregnant, but no one teaches you how to get pregnant when you can't get pregnant. So I really want to help others with my story because it sucks. Infertility sucks and there's no way around it. And it's very difficult for people to understand unless you've been through it or you're going through it. Sometimes you can just feel completely alone, and it can be just feeling like you're isolated, especially if you don't know anyone that's going through it. I'm personally so thankful that one of my very good friends just had a beautiful baby boy through IVF, and she has just started her second round. And the fact that I have someone to relate to and lean on truly makes all the difference in the world, and I'm so thankful for that. So I hope that I can be a beacon of light for people who are going through this and feel like they don't have anybody on their side because you're not alone. But sometimes it can be hard to let others in if we're experiencing this, especially if all our friends are having kids or they're moms already, and each pregnancy announcement and baby shower can just sting a little bit because naturally you see all the joy around you. And of course, that does not take away from your happiness for others. At least for me, I've always been able to be happy for others despite the lack of something in my own life. My mom actually told me this cute story of me the other day, and I had completely forgotten that I had even done this in high school. But long story short, I had quit the basketball team, and that's an entirely different story because, guys, my high school basketball experience was horrendous. It was truly just a small town, like politics thing, but that's a whole different story and doesn't really matter. The point is, one of my friends who still played on the team was running for something in the student body. And I can't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of like her running for captain or something to do with the sports. But despite having just quit the team myself, which was a huge part of my identity, and I was naturally very sad about quitting, I still showed up for my friend and made those posters to help her run for this position because I still wanted her to win. And I say all that to say, if you're listening and you have a friend who's either experienced a miscarriage or is experiencing infertility, and you may not want to share your news in order to protect her, but I would argue that maybe you do share. You know, we don't want to be hiding our wins from our friends because if they're your true friends, they're going to be happy for you regardless because most of us, and I speak for myself, even though we're not pregnant, we still want to experience that joy with you. You know, I've had acquaintances or clients in the past tell me they're expecting and then realize where I'm at and quickly turn this the subject and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "No, no, like it doesn't have to be this way." And I know they're coming from a good spot, but it's okay that your journey isn't mine and our journeys are our own. So please tell your friend about your pregnancy, invite your friend who may be struggling with infertility to your baby shower. At least you welcomed her in, and it gives her the option to either join or decline instead of you making the decision for her. And maybe that can help other women who experience infertility to not feel alone too, because it can feel so isolating and like a huge weight that's just sitting on your shoulders because you're just trying to figure it out. It can feel like this code that you're trying to crack in another language, and you're like in a dark room, like trying to read your LH strips completely blindfolded. Like, that's the best analogy that I can come up with when you're trying to figure out how to get pregnant, but you can't get pregnant. Because for so many of us, when we start to question the ability to bear children after we've been trying for a long period of time, we automatically start looking for answers. Like, we go on the hunt, full on detective mode, asking questions like, are our hormones out of sync? Are we stressed? Is it me? Is it him? Do we have any underlying illnesses that have previously been unknown to us? Do we have a low egg reserve? Is there a low sperm count? Infertility is such a complex issue, and it's different for everyone. And we can do our best to de-stress. We can track our cycles with all these new gadgets like the Aura Ring and pee on LH strips every day and lay upside down on our backs after sex for however long we feel like is good. But there is a point where we may need to seek help from a specialist. And that's a really hard place to be. That's a hard decision to make, to come to the conclusion that you can't get pregnant naturally and that just isn't in the cards for you. To finally decide to stop trying and to interfere with science. For one, it's expensive. And two, there's a lot of shame and frustration surrounding women who have trouble getting pregnant naturally. I know women who have tried for well over 5 years, and I know women who have tried for 6 months or less. And the feelings are the same, no matter how long or how short you struggled. And I know for me, I felt all those same feelings: frustration, shame. You start to feel the opposite of hopeful every month when you get that negative pregnancy test. And for us, even though we felt like we were educated, my husband, John, owns a hormone company and is very knowledgeable about his health and does regular blood panels. And I had had my AMH levels checked in the previous year. So we thought we were good. Like, we both thought we were educated on our own individual fertility statuses. But even then, once we started having trouble, I felt shame that I wasn't able to give my husband a child. Like, that's our birthright from God. And even though I knew this was a silly thought in my head, I still felt broken. And it was really hard for me to shake that for a little bit. But we're human, and it's really hard sharing that with you guys, but I just want to be honest so we can completely change this narrative. I really want to crush this mentality of feeling broken. I want to like wad it up into like a little ball and like throw it into the fire, because infertility is becoming so common nowadays. The natural fertility rate is only 20% per month for a healthy, fertile 30-year-old woman. That means for every 100 fertile 30-year-olds trying to get pregnant in a single cycle, 20 will be successful and the other 80 will have to try again. That's a really low percentage. Remember when we were younger and they beat it into us, the fear of becoming pregnant so easily? Like, if you looked at the member of the opposite sex a certain way, like bam, you'd be knocked up. But it's not that way. Like, yes, it is easier for some people, but for most of us, that's simply not the case. For most couples, it will take at least 6 months to a year of trying. And if you're young and healthy, you should be getting pregnant within that 6 months. But like I said, that's not always the case. So if you're currently in this, I am praying for you. My heart goes out to you because I know it's not easy, and I would not wish this on anyone. No one wants to be considered infertile, and it's not a fun journey to that diagnosis. For instance, maybe you're 30 right now and you're currently trying to get pregnant, but you're having trouble, and you make an appointment at a fertility clinic. That clinic will most likely tell you to try for an entire year before they will consider you to be infertile, before they will ever consider an IUI treatment or an IVF treatment. So infertility isn't even considered until a certain amount of trying is reached, and it really depends on your age, but the general rule is if you're 34 and younger, you would be considered infertile after just 1 year of trying with unprotected sex. However, if you're a woman who is 35 and older, The evaluation should begin after about 6 months of trying. So, most clinics will want you to try and reach that max time of trying. So, lucky for us, my husband and I wouldn't start trying till I was 34 years old. And I say this sarcastically because I found myself right smack dab center in that age difference between, well, I guess we should try for a full year, and also starting to worry in the back of my mind that something might be wrong with me. And our story is different for the simple reason that we didn't meet till much later in life. When I met my husband, John, I was 32 and he was 40. And prior to him, I had never been in a position where I was actively trying to get pregnant. I had never had a pregnancy scare in my life. John is my first marriage. He's the first man I ever considered having a child with. So I never had to put my fertility to the test, sort of say, till the age of 34. So after we dated for a year and got married, we would immediately start trying to get pregnant because, again, time was not on our side. And I was 34 and I knew it would take us at least probably a year of trying to conceive. And I was looking at possibly having a child at 35 or even 36. Now, if someone were to ask my advice, and not that anyone is, but I'm just going to throw this out there. If you are newly married and you're younger, I would recommend that you wait at least a year before trying for kids, because that newlywed stage is just so important. I mean, they call it newlywed bliss for a reason. You're still mapping out your roles as husband and wife, and I just think it's really important to enjoy each other first before introducing kids into the picture. So travel, go on dates, all those newlywed things are so important before even introducing kids into the picture. But like I said, our story is different. We started trying right away because fertility does steadily begin to decline after the age of 35. I love that for me. Not saying that it's not possible to get pregnant into your late 30s or even your early 40s. One of our good friends is currently pregnant and expecting a beautiful baby girl this spring. So it is possible. There are plenty of women who still get pregnant in their 40s and have beautiful babies. But at the age of 35 and up, you are considered a geriatric pregnancy. And honestly, that term just makes me laugh so hard because it refers to old people. I mean, gosh, I truly feel my age right now. But regardless of what age you're at, I do think it's important to have these conversations surrounding fertility with your spouse before you ever start officially trying, because most of us walk around and we don't know. We don't know how many eggs we got. We don't know how many sperms we got swimming around. And that's exactly what John and I did. And looking back, we were prepping for it well before we had even started. So backing up, we had both talked about starting a family well before our engagement. We had conversations surrounding both of our fertility statuses, which isn't a natural conversation for couples to have. I get it. Like, it's not sexy to ask your partner what their sperm count is, and that doesn't really set the mood. Like, nobody's getting hot and heavy over high AMH levels. But I joke about this because it's an important conversation to have. And maybe we did that because we're older. I don't know. But whatever the case is, if you're in this position, have these conversations with your partner. There are actions that you can take ahead of time to set yourself up for success. Or if you're getting negative results and you're not able to get pregnant, it can provide some answers. Men can test their sperm count, and women can get a simple blood test done at their OB to measure their AMH levels, which measures a hormone called anti-Müllerian, which corresponds to a woman's egg count. It doesn't necessarily predict fertility, but I do think it's an important piece of the pie, and it can help you understand if your egg reserve is the problem or not. So next time you're at your OB, just ask for a simple blood test to measure your AMH levels. So for me, my AMH was great. It was 3.5, and you want to be between 1.5 at the lowest and about a 4.0. Anything above 4.0 is considered super high, and that number does decrease as you get older, but you want to be within that sweet spot. So I actually would have one of these tests done before I ever met my husband, John. I was about 30, 31 when I had my first AMH test because I was so concerned. I mean, at that point in my life, I really began to worry about finding the right partner to have a child. And honestly, I hate the term the clock is ticking, but I mean, it's kind of true. There is real pressure surrounding women who are at this age because time is not on our side. And I really felt that in my early 30s. I had a really long string of bad relationships, and I'd worried that if I'd ever find a husband, I worried if I'd ever become a mom, but asking my OB to test my ovarian reserve felt like putting the power back in my hands. It was truly one of the best things I could have ever done for myself because it eased my worries at the time. And I had known my egg reserve then, and that was great. And I decided that if I didn't meet anyone within those next 2 years, I was gonna freeze my eggs. So it really gave me the power back. So I can't recommend just doing that test. It's so simple and it can give you some answers. And for John, he tested his sperm with a kit, and you can purchase it right off of Amazon. I'm going to link this in the show notes. It's called Yo Sperm Test, and it's $80, I think, for a pack of 2. You can also get like a pack of 4. So it's not really pricey, but it's great because you're not just getting an account for the sperm, you're also seeing the mobility and the health of the sperm, which is really important because they're doing all the work to find those eggs. So you can see them move in real time through a live video clip in this test. It's pretty cool. So again, I'll link that in the show notes if anyone's interested. It's what we used and it helped a lot. I mean, it let us know that John's sperm was good to go. So basically with sperm, you want to be over 15 million to greater than like 200 million sperm per milliliter of semen. You're considered to have a low count if you have anything fewer than 15 million per milliliter. I know, it's crazy. The normal range is around 48 million. So John would end up increasing his count from 0. He has a long history of TRT, and he would increase his from 0 to about 70 to 80 million with the help of his hormone knowledge. He came off testosterone and took hormone medications like FSH and HCG. So we would go into January of 2023 feeling really good because John's sperm was good, my egg reserve was good. We were actively trying and living our lives, but month to month went by and negative test after negative test. And I would get so many like phantom pregnancy feelings, like late periods. My boobs would feel sore randomly, and we would just end up getting our hopes up only to feel defeated when my period would start again. I remember I used to daydream about how I would surprise John with a pregnancy test, like a positive pregnancy test, and that still kind of makes me sad because I think that's a special part of it, right? Like making a surprise for your spouse and your loved ones, and you see all these cute pregnancy videos online where the wife surprises her husband with like a box of donuts, and inside there's like a positive pregnancy test and a pair of cute baby shoes. And that was something that I held on dearly to for a long time. Imagining his joy and the emotions we would share always brought a smile to my face, and it still does. Yet the reality is that life doesn't always unfold according to our wishes, and in the midst of trying to get pregnant, my dad's health would take a drastic turn. We were completely blindsided by this. I mean, he had just walked me down the aisle in our wedding that previous December. But in May of 2023, just before his 75th birthday, my dad would take a terrible fall down the stairs in my parents' home, and my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and at this time, I believe he was in like the mild to moderate stage. He was still cognizant of what was going on. Sometimes his memory would slip here and there, and he still needed like a little bit extra time to get his thoughts out or to create full sentences, but he was still independent for the most part. He was just starting to have trouble like getting around. He shuffled when he walked, and he would use a cane sparingly to help him get around. So this fall down 12 steps of stairs would be absolutely devastating to his health and would eventually be the catalyst for his further decline in the rapid progression of the Alzheimer's and eventually his passing in just 2 short months. Because this fall would not only cause him to break his hip, it would also cause a major brain bleed in his brain that we wouldn't discover until it was too late. And knowing that still haunts me because for 2 months we believed the enemy was his broken hip, and my focus every day was his rehab exercises and helping him to walk again and making sure he was eating enough and staying hydrated, when in reality, there was something so much more sinister happening underneath the surface that the doctors missed and was impossible for us to see. The bleed was so minor that it just didn't show up in his initial scans. So the focus was what did show up, which was his fractured hip. So my mom and I would spend a week with him in the hospital by his side, morning, day, and night, until he was strong enough to be transferred to a rehab facility inside a nursing home. Because keep in mind, he needed assistance with everything. He couldn't walk. The fracture was just way too painful. And even worse, the pain medication and dementia, they do not play well together. And it just exacerbated his confusion. And looking back during this time and reflecting, it just breaks my heart. I mean, we had at that time been trying for a baby for about 5 months, and everything just came to a screeching halt when my dad got sick because he needed me. My family needed me. I mean, we were in full-on survival mode. My stress and anxiety levels just shot through the roof. And stress is not good when you're trying to conceive. I'm fairly certain I didn't even ovulate during this time because I was just pouring so much energy and time into my dad, which I do not regret at all. I truly believe in life, we are supposed to repay our parents by taking care of them when they're older and they need us the most. But that also meant that my cup was empty. My own health was suffering. I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't drinking enough, sleeping. I couldn't even pour energy into my own marriage, my own friendships. I couldn't even pour energy into myself because I was just trying to do everything I could to ensure my dad would survive. I was quite literally in survival mode. And I remember the day when my dad could be discharged from the hospital, and I just begged my mom to take him home. I remember telling her that I would do anything I could to bring him home. I'd move in, I'd drop everything with work just to take care of him. And looking back, I just want to hug that girl because my love for my dad made me so blind to how much help we truly needed. But that's the last thing anyone wants to do, is leave their parent inside of a nursing home. So instead, I did the next best thing. And I'm really going to try to get through this without crying, you guys, because it's really important. I just know somebody out there has been through this as well. So instead of being able to bring him home, I would spend all my time in the nursing home with him. If I couldn't bring him home, I was going to go to him. So a routine would set in, and I would wake up early, and I would get there at 6 a.m. and I would stay till about 2 or 3 in the afternoon when my mom would come in and she would take over the night shift. We would joke that I had morning shifts and she had night shifts. And it was so hard sleeping during this time because if you know anything about Alzheimer's, you know that sundowners is a real thing. And I knew my dad was up early waiting on me there every morning. And every morning, I would just do everything I could to get up as soon as I could and rush to see him. I would rush down the hallways to round the corner and to see him in his wheelchair with like the biggest smile on his face because I knew he was waiting on me with his little protein drink and his bowl of Cheerios. Day after day, I was by his side during his physical therapy, which we would call working out, and I'd watch him do his exercises. And I just remember thinking back to all the times that he was there for me as a child when I was playing sports, and what a blessing it was to be able to stop everything and just to be there for him the way that I could whenever he needed me the most. It meant the world to me, and it felt like a full circle moment. But despite it being so incredibly hard, we would find ways to infuse humor into the situation. One day he called the exercise bike a nut buster, and I just died laughing. If I tried to move one of his legs to help him get into bed, he'd squeal and act like I hurt him just to mess with me. And that's my dad. He was just the biggest goofball, and now I see where I get it. Eventually, he would be able to return home from the nursing home, but it was very short-lived. In just under a week, my mom and I noticed a drastic decline in his cognition and motor abilities, and we knew something was very wrong. We would take him back to the hospital for another scan, only to receive the most devastating news. My dad had a chronic subdural hematoma in between his brain and his skull, which is a brain bleed that had been building this entire time. It took every ounce of faith in me to not curse God for this. I had spent an entire month and more fighting the wrong thing. I had felt so defeated, and I remember pleading with God as my dad would end up going into 2 brain surgeries. And I remember even before the first brain surgery, before they wheeled him out of the ICU room, he grabbed my hand and he pulled me forcibly toward his mouth so he could kiss my hand. He couldn't talk at the time, but I knew that he was just trying to comfort me. And that's my dad, like always just trying to comfort and be there for people despite anything that he was going through. And I was just a complete mess. I remember laying in the waiting room couch and just staring up at the ceiling for hours. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't move. I just sat there and I was numb until I knew that he was okay. But in the end, even after undergoing 2 brain surgeries, the damage was just too severe. It would have been a lot for someone who didn't have Alzheimer's disease. So my mom and I would end up having to make the really hard decision to bring him home on hospice and to help him pass peacefully in the comfort of his home, surrounded by those he loved. It was the hardest decision we have ever had to make. There's so much that I want to say about this time in my life because it truly changed who I am as a person. I'm not the same person. The Danielle before her dad's fall, before watching her father take his last breath, she is not the same person who sits before you today. But I do want to stay on track and talk about our fertility. It's hard enough for me talking about my dad. I'm already getting emotional, I'm sure you can see. But I do think that my dad and his story deserves its own episode surrounding death and grief and how we are called to take care of our parents when they need us the most. But for now, we're going to pocket that and dissect it in a later episode. Because grief and death, much like infertility, it changes you, and you just don't understand until you lose a parent. I've lost grandparents, and it's not the same. Your parents are your root system, and it's just different, and you don't know it until you've gone through it. My dad would eventually pass to heaven on July 4th, just over 2 months after his fall, which was so hard, yet so beautiful and so surreal at the same time. Hearing the fireworks felt like a surreal celebration and also kind of like a joke. And it would take several months after his passing before that fog would begin to lift. My dad's absence did not make it easier trying to conceive, knowing in the back of my head that he wouldn't get to experience this with me here on this earth, but I just tried not to think about that. And I tried to back off on work. I tried to clear my plate and to de-stress. I turned down projects. I said no to people, which was really hard. And during those last few months of 2023, we tried our best to get pregnant naturally. But we just weren't successful. And at this time, I told myself, if it didn't happen by our 1-year wedding anniversary, which was at the end of the year on December 9th, I was going to take the next steps and seek a specialist. Which again is really hard because you're admitting to yourself that you need help. So we would end up meeting with a few different doctors to weigh out our options and get some different pricing. And we ended up really liking a doctor here in St. Louis. He's with St. Louis Fertility Partnership. His name is Dr. Ilan Simkes. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. He was and is the most personable doctor we met with and seemed the most fair in terms of pricing. Plus, my OB had recommended him to me, and I love my OB, so we went with that option. So we met with Dr. Simkes and we discussed our numbers in terms of John's sperm count and my egg count and our confusion there because it just wasn't sticking. So he would decide to do a vaginal ultrasound to further investigate and to count my follicles. And that's when another bomb would be dropped on us. And I just remember laying there on the table, getting the ultrasound done, and him looking at the screen, which is like kind of tilted away from me, so it's hard to see. And he pointed and he was saying that he was seeing a lot of dark fluid. And I look over at John and I'm like, WTF, what is this? Because I knew that couldn't be good. But the doctor didn't really elaborate much. He just went straight into counting my follicles, which he was super happy about, and he counted a lot of them. I honestly forgot the number because I was still processing the fact that he said there was dark fluid inside my uterus. So he pulled out the wand, he helped me up, and he told me that he was 99% sure that I had endometriosis and that I was probably stage 2 or 3. I could literally feel my throat start to tighten, and I was fighting back tears as I asked him what the severity of this was. I had no idea what endometriosis was. I had heard of it before, but I didn't know how this could potentially prevent us from having a child. Did I have to have surgery? Was there medication? I just had no idea what the protocol was. But he reassured me that thousands of women have come through his doors with endometriosis and they have gotten pregnant successfully, and now they have beautiful families of their own, and that I would be no different. He also said that there are some cases where if the endometriosis isn't as severe, maybe not, stage 4 is the most severe. That's when you have cysts that actually need to be surgically removed. But he said that sometimes pregnancy can actually help improve some symptoms and cause sort of a pseudo-suppressed state for the hormone production, because when you're pregnant, you're not having your period, and that's what causes endometriosis. So in case you don't know, endometriosis is an inflammatory disease. So the endometrium is the tissue lining a woman's uterus. And every month when that tissue sheds, your period, it can actually backflow through your fallopian tubes and attach itself to nearby organs. And it can cause extreme amounts of pain. It can cause painful periods. It can even block your tubes and keep your eggs and the sperm from ever uniting, which I'm pretty sure it has to be the case with us. And the only way to remove it is to do a laparoscopy, which is considered a major surgery. They have to make an incision in your abdomen. You have to go under, but there's a catch. You have to wait at least 6 to 12 months after a surgery like this before you ever consider doing an IVF treatment. And even the percentage then doesn't really increase that much. And endo does return in time. So there's no cure unless there's a woman going through menopause or you have a hysterectomy, because you're not going to be having those monthly hormonal fluctuations that caused this to happen in the first place. But surgery was not something that he was recommending. Again, time was not on our side. If I had decided to have this surgery, it would put us back another full year possibly before having a child, and then I'd be like 37 having my first child. The crazy thing is that 1 in 10 women have this disease. It's so common that in infertile women alone, 20 to 50% will suffer from this. So there's a huge overlap between women who have infertility and women who have this disease, which is why most specialists will recommend going straight to an IVF treatment because you're bypassing the problem. Now, my last piece of advice for anyone with endometriosis is to take inventory of your lifestyle choices, because while there is no cure, like I said, this is an inflammatory disease, so there are measures that you can take to lessen the symptoms. Make sure you're living in a chemical-free environment, which is really hard to do, so just do your best and kind of pick your battles when it comes to that. Go gluten-free because gluten can cause hormone imbalances and additional inflammation. You may want to also limit caffeine and consumption of alcohol. You just want to avoid inflammatory things. So for me, I drink a lot of matcha and green tea. And that brings us to where we are today. And as of now, I am on day 7 of STIMS, which is short for stimulation, ovarian stimulation, and basically involves the injection of medications like I'm on Follistim and Menopur. It's usually for 8 to 14 days. I'm going to be on these medications for about 12 days to induce the ovaries to produce more eggs and to ultimately maximize your chances of success by generating as many mature eggs as possible. So far, so good. I'm really excited to continue sharing this journey because I know there are a lot of women out there who have walked this path before or who are about to start. And I just want to be a light of hope for someone out there who feels hopeless, who feels alone, because you're not. I'm a woman of faith and I serve a big God who I know is capable of more than I could ever hope to imagine. And I'm here to tell you that you're never alone. So hold on to your faith. I think of the story of Sarah in the Bible, Abraham's wife. She was so desperate to give her husband a child that she took matters into her own hands and gave her servant Hagar to her husband to bear a child, which was a common practice back in that day. However, the next time God speaks with Abraham, he says to Sarah that she will indeed be the mother of a child promised to them, not the child Abraham had with Hagar. Sarah hears this and would actually laugh at God, and God was like, "Excuse me, what? Did you just laugh at my promise, Sarah?" And Sarah was like, "No, not me. I did not. Of course not. Never." But God would pay no mind to the fact that she had questioned him. And at the age of 91, God's promise would be fulfilled and Sarah would conceive Isaac. And when reading through Sarah's story, you may be quick to assume that she didn't believe because she straight up laughed at God. So you may have the instinct to call her an unbeliever, but Hebrews 11:11 says differently. It says, "By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring. Even though she was well past the age, 91, mind you, she still considered that the one who had promised was faithful." It says it right there in the Bible. And Sarah may have originally thought that she was going to have a child at the age of 75 when God first came to Abraham, but over time she grew to believe the promises may not include her after all. I mean, she waited 25 years for a baby of her own, and I don't blame her for getting weary in the waiting, for becoming desperate. She no doubt felt all the same feelings that we do, few, fear, anger, disbelief. I don't even blame her for laughing at the thought of being pregnant at the age of 91. But she had 25 years of watching how God was fulfilling all these promises to Abraham and in so many different aspects of their lives. She saw miracles happen all around her. She saw when they were blessed with livestock and gold and silver. She saw how God had used her husband Abraham to save her nephew from war. She even watched how their economic power grew time and time again. And all the while, she wondered, when will it be my turn? And it says it right there in the Bible, right there in Hebrews 11:11, that she had faith. And by faith alone, while facing the impossible, God ultimately provided. And I just love that story. And I think it's beautiful. It's a message of hope. And gosh, if Sarah were here today, I feel like she would be a wealth of information. She would have so much encouraging words for women who are waiting today. Was Sarah a perfect woman? Of course not. But in the end, God overlooked her faults and her moral failures because she put her trust in him. So I want to leave you guys with that there's hope, that if Sarah can do it, so can you. If I can do it, a woman sitting here at the age of 35 who has never experienced a positive pregnancy test, you can do it too. You're not alone. And if there is anyone listening who has any questions or needs someone to talk to, my door is always open to you. You don't have to be afraid to bring other people into your journey. Don't be afraid of sharing. Instead of feeling ashamed because you're not perfect, not sharing for the fear of judgment, when in reality, when you share, you let go of your own self-righteousness, and you'll be surprised to see that people will rally behind you. So if you're in it right now, share it with your loved ones, share it with your close friends, the people who you can trust, who can come alongside you. But before I end the episode, I want to answer a couple questions that I got on my stories from my question box, and I feel like these are really good. I'm going to start with the most hard-hitting question. Let's just dive right in. Would love to know your thoughts on the IVF debate and what's happening in Alabama. This is a big one, guys. This is a big one. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this topic, but I do think it's an important one to address, considering what's just happened in Alabama in February of this year, which is 2024. So if you didn't know, the Alabama State Supreme Court just ruled that embryos have the same rights as children. And if you destroy an embryo, that would be considered manslaughter. This all started in 2020 when 3 couples accidentally had their embryos destroyed in a reproductive clinic in Alabama, which is so heartbreaking. Somebody broke into the lab where the embryos were stored and dropped them, and thus the embryos were destroyed. I mean, that is just so horrible. The couples went on to sue the clinic for wrongful death of a minor, which means they were equating embryos with children. And I'm not blaming them for this at all. I'm not blaming them for being upset or even feeling like they had lost their children. I can't even imagine what those couples went through. So I think we can all agree that what happened to those couples is awful, but I think we can still have feelings surrounding how this situation is being interpreted and how it's starting to play out. Because this has huge implications for people seeking IVF treatments. The idea that embryos have the same rights as children, it could potentially change the entire IVF process. It could make it much more expensive to do this, and it could potentially make an already grueling process for women so much worse. It just doesn't make sense. So much goes into these cycles. It's not just as simple as getting one egg. You don't just retrieve one egg and then fertilize one egg and then implant one embryo. You could do that potentially, but the chances of success become very low because all along the process, things naturally don't make it. They don't survive, or they're not genetically normal, or you could implant an embryo into someone and it may not take. So what happens if a woman miscarries an implanted embryo? Is the provider held liable for manslaughter? What happens if you have a genetically abnormal embryo? Are you going to force people to implant them, even knowing that it will never result in a baby or a normal baby? Like, what if we know the embryo has a life-threatening genetic disorder? Are people going to be forced to implant no matter what? Because according to this ruling, you can't get rid of an embryo because that would be considered manslaughter. Am I the only one that thinks this is crazy? And what happens if you are lucky and you get 6 healthy embryos? Are you going to be forced to use them all or pay for them to be stored indefinitely? These are all questions that we should be asking ourselves, and I just don't agree with this new ruling. And in my opinion, fertility doctors have organized this entire process, the IVF process, the way it is for a reason. They stimulate a bunch of eggs in the ovaries at once to retrieve, and this is the only way to ensure the highest success rates while also making it easier on the women who are going through all of this, the blood work, the injections, the medication. It's hard enough not being able to get pregnant naturally, but this also makes it more cost effective because you're able to retrieve several eggs at once instead of having to limit yourself to one egg per retrieval. That just doesn't make sense to me. Because also it's expensive. On average, a single IVF cycle can cost anywhere from $14,000 to $30,000, and it's never a guaranteed process. So sometimes couples can take several times before it's even successful. But it's a process that we as hopeful parents don't even bat an eye at because it's a process that gives us hope that our prayers one day for a family will be answered. And ironically, I would call that pro life. And this is where I feel like fundamentalists have gone a little too far. I've always considered myself pro-life. I am Christian. I am anti-abortion. There are exceptions to the rule. I never believe anything is so black and white in life, but that's just a whole different topic. But this whole embryo debate just seems very separate to me. And maybe that's because I'm going through it myself. Maybe you disagree, and that's okay. We're all entitled to our opinions, and this is just mine. There is an ethical and Christian way to do IVF, and in my opinion, IVF is a beautiful way to bring life into the world. And as husband and wives, in the eyes of God, we are meant to reproduce. I mean, in Genesis, it says, be fruitful and multiply. And I do understand the argument that embryos are life. And I do understand the argument that embryos are cells, but I'm here to say that there are options. There is options other than destroying your embryos. There is options to adopt, which I would argue is even more pro-life. And there are so many other man-made technologies that help people survive nowadays. And I view those as gifts from God as well. So in my opinion, IVF helps build families. And I don't believe that the state nor the government has the right or the authority to govern a woman's body or the embryos that she creates with her husband except for herself. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, question number 2. My husband and I are about to start IVF and I'm terrified of the meds. I get you. How did you emotionally prepare? This is a good one. And a lot of you asked me this. There's a lot of people who follow me who are about to do IVF. So I'm praying for you. And I will say that the thing that helped me a lot was a lot of praying and a lot of talking to God. This is something that John and I say all the time. It's easy to be positive and to have a good mindset when you've received God's grace, truly. Having your own relationship with God makes all the difference in the world. I know for me it does, and I seek Him out every single day. It's me getting up early and spending time in my Bible, truly digesting it and learning its teachings. It's me singing in my car to my favorite worship songs, going to church with my mom. It's fellowship with my friends. That's the foundation for everything in my life. And what I use to reinforce that mindfulness and to keep me grounded is journaling. You can vent through journaling. You can release thoughts that don't serve you. You can keep stock of your day-to-days. And for me, that might be a little bit of my controlling nature showing, but it just helps me feel at ease and to think things through and also to look back and be proud of how far I've come. And finally, therapy. It's so underrated. I cannot recommend getting a good therapist enough. And it's not like you have to go every single week, but find a good therapist, one that you can candidly talk to and discuss ideas, thoughts, feelings. Too many of us live inside of our heads, and that's a dangerous place to be. I also think it's easy for me to go into this with a good mindset because I've already seen my husband, John, go through 14 months of a hormonal imbalance. So for a few weeks, for me, maybe a month total feels very doable and kind of like a small blip on the radar in the grand scheme of things. So I will say just mindset is everything. So lean into your faith, lean into journaling as well. Question number 3, and this will be our last question. A lot of you have asked this question. What supplements have you been taking? My doctor has me on Fulplex, which is a combination of B6 and B12. I'm also taking CoQ10, 600 milligrams about, which is an antioxidant that studies show can improve your egg quality, and it can also thicken your uterine lining. But consult with your doctor before you add any of these things into your cocktail of medications that you take. I'm also taking baby aspirin. I'm taking vitamin D3, which is about 5,000 IUs of that, which is also good for higher pregnancy rates. I'm also taking a DHA prenatal from True Grace. I'll actually link my prenatal in the show notes. If you guys use my code DAP15, you can get 15% off of your order. I'm also taking an elderberry liquid supplement from Mary Roos because I just love elderberry. I usually take some when I'm not feeling so good because it can boost your immune system. So for me, taking all these shots and medications, I felt like it was a good idea. Plus, you can make your immune system even better for a baby. So that's it for me, guys. This was a long one, but I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, I do plan on doing another episode once we get through our entire IVF journey. It's such an exciting time, and I hope that someone got something out of this episode. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting this podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, be sure to rate the show and follow so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button if you want to. No pressure. I'll see you guys next time. Be safe and make good decisions.